Okay, Mr. Justice, are you prepared for your closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor, thank
Whenever
you.
you're ready.
Thank you. This case is entitled The State of Nevada versus Devyn Michaels. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest standard in the American justice system. It shows an adoption of a belief that we took from the old common law from England, that it's better to let 10 guilty men go free than to wrongfully convict an innocent person. I would also submit to you that it shows a belief and an understanding from the Founding Fathers that very few people have the resources, the opportunity, or the ability to prove their innocence. You've seen that through the course of this trial. You have officers come in, collect evidence, and officers are people. I'm not going to stand before you and say this officer's a bad person. We talked about it through jury selection. But officers make mistakes. People are subject to biases, to confirmation bias, where they reach a conclusion first and then kind of work backwards. And I would submit to you that that is what happened in this case. And our Founding Fathers understood that. And that's why they placed the burden upon the state, and the state alone, to prove its case, each and every element of its case, beyond a reasonable doubt. I'd like to talk a few minutes about the jury instructions. We had a few technical difficulties, but you all have the same packet. I'd like to discuss just a few of these instructions. I'm not going to tell you which boxes to check. You're smart. You paid attention, very close attention throughout the entirety of this trial. You are the sole judges of the facts. You alone will decide what will happen to Devyn Michaels. Instruction number 3 talks about murder with use of a deadly weapon, and that's what the state wants you to convict her of, first degree with use. But the pleading document is telling. Instruction 3, it states, murder with use of a deadly weapon did willfully and lawfully, feloniously, with malice aforethought, kill Johnathan Willette, a human being, with use of a deadly weapon, to wit, a wooden stick and or other unknown object, by striking the said Johnathan Willette with said wooden stick and or other unknown object, and or through other unknown means. And then it lays out the mental state. It has to be deliberate, premeditated, or, of all things, committed during the perpetration or attempted perpetration of a robbery. The following instructions in this packet lay out, after you've assumed that Devyn has killed somebody, her mental states. Instructions 6 through 16 talk about all the different mental states required. That's after you've determined that this person did the killing. There's even a number of instructions concerning robbery. It's instructions 17 through 20. You see, in the state of Nevada, we have what's called this felony murder rule. It's a shortcut. It's maybe basically getting to the shortest distance between 2 points to convict her of first-degree murder. There are, however, other instructions that I would like to spend a little more time on. And again, you are the sole judges of facts. You will review these instructions. But unlike us, who had this case for some time, this case is new to you. You were introduced to this case when we all met and began talking at the beginning of last week. There is an instruction concerning expert testimony, instruction 33. Please look at that. There's a common sense instruction. And I'm going to flip to that. It's kind of telling. Both parties generally point to this idea of common sense. Again, shows the wisdom. Instruction number 34. Although you are to consider only the evidence in the case in reaching a verdict, you must bring to the consideration of the evidence your everyday common sense and judgment as reasonable men and women. Thus, you are not limited solely to what you see and hear as the witnesses testify. You may draw reasonable inferences from the evidence which you feel are justified in light of common experience, keeping in mind that such inferences should not be based on speculation or guess. A verdict may never be influenced by sympathy, prejudice, or public opinion. Your decision should be the product of sincere judgment and sound discretion in accordance with these rules of law. As I go through my comments, and trust me, I'm going to leave things out. It's inherent in the process. Please use your common sense. You've taken good notes and you've paid attention. Please review the exhibits and don't take my word or that of the state of Nevada. Reach your own conclusions. Review the evidence. There is an instruction that I think is of paramount importance in this case, and it's instruction 32. It concerns the credibility or the believability of a witness should be determined by his manner upon the stand, his relationships to the parties, his fears, motives, interests, or feelings, his opportunity to observe the matter to which he testified, the reasonableness of his statements, and the strength or weaknesses of his recollections. If you believe that a witness has lied about any material fact in the case, you may disregard the entire testimony of that witness or any portion of his testimony which is not proved by other evidence. I read this instruction to you with Deviere in mind. We started this case talking about motivations. Motivations dictate actions. Deviere is not on trial. This case is not going to be, well, did we prove our case against Deviere better than they proved their case against Devyn? Devyn is the only person that's on trial. We have gone through the evidence in good faith, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit with you today in my summation, that there is evidence to believe that Deviere committed this crime. But you don't have to believe that to acquit my client. But I would submit to you that you should take that into consideration. The ultimate determination that you will make as the sole judgment of the facts is whether the state has proven this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Through the course of this case, and as you know, and we talked about it, we wouldn't have to ask a single question, present a single line of testimony. If state fails to prove their case, she's entitled to a verdict of not guilty. But as this evidence has unfolded, I would urge you to see that perhaps the detectives in this case, the Henderson Police Department, were basically trying to choose the shortest distance between 2 points. Hey, we knew, and we all know, and we're not making issue that she was with him on the night in question. It's easy to reach a judgment like they did. She's guilty. But you, as jurors, must consider all of the evidence. Because unlike when you read in the paper, so-and-so's caught, and you think, yeah, he's guilty, she's guilty, you determine whether a person is guilty. Not the police and not the state of Nevada. I would urge you to read the reasonable doubt instruction. A defendant is presumed innocent until the contrary is proved. This presumption places upon the state the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt every element of the crime charged, and that the defendant is the person who committed the offense. And again, this is why we have addressed what the evidence reasonably shows concerning Deviere. A reasonable doubt is one based on reason. It is not mere possible doubt, but is such a doubt as would govern or control a person in the more weighty affairs of life. And what more weighty affair of life do you have than to sit on this jury on this type of charge? If the minds of the jurors, after the entire comparison and consideration of all the evidence, are in such a condition that they say they feel an abiding conviction of the truth of the charge, there is not a reasonable doubt. Doubt to be reasonable must be actual, not mere possibility or speculation. If you have a reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant, she is entitled to a verdict of not guilty. Since this is a charge of murder, I'd like to begin my comments, and I won't be long. I mean, we've been here a long time, but this is important. Let's begin at the autopsy. We had Dr. Sims. He was the lead coroner here in Clark County for 19 and a half years. You heard his testimony. It wasn't much of a cross because he didn't say much to be disagreed with. We did, however, hear from Dr. Yagi. Do you recall the question that was posed to her? Would you agree with me that a decapitation is difficult to effectuate? Remember her answer? I don't know, I've never done one. We heard from Dr. Sims that yes, it would be difficult. It takes a lot. It's involved. Dr. Yagi missed the tattoos. It was in the report. We had Oriental John. That kind of goes to the weight that you should give her testimony and the thoroughness of her examination of the body. The state's relying upon Dr. Yagi's statement, her testimony that there was no injury on the hand. You got to consider the source. Dr. Sims testified that the cause of death cannot be determined without evidence of injury, and he was talking about standard practices. Obviously, these are very suspicious circumstances. In fact, if John was murdered, it's very reasonable to assume, common sense would dictate, that the person that killed him decapitated him. And through the course of this evidence, they have not shown a scintilla of evidence that she was involved with a decapitation. She didn't do it. Determination of homicidal violence cannot be used when in large part that fatty liver or drugs and alcohol are present. He was talking basically about the industry standards, what experts in this field collectively agreed upon. And we saw a variation in this case from Dr. Yagi. In this case, we did have a combination of all three. You heard the testimony about 20 times the level of THC, alcohol in the body. 0.02 was the alcohol in the blood, but Dr. Sims testified that that, in conjunction with this high level of THC, would cause a person to be intoxicated. That's important in this case because you will hear testimony concerning her concern, Devyn's concern, about not letting him drive. As you recall, we went through all those texts beginning back in 2018 concerning Yoko's concern. And again, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, and it was no showing of disrespect towards her, but it was an ongoing concern that she had. She didn't want her son driving drunk, and that concern was shared by Devyn. She had his key. She took the key to the house. That's not evidence that she committed a murder. This is extremely important, and there's been a great deal of issue made concerning this video evidence. As you recall, through the course of Deviere's testimony, I read it to you at the beginning of the trial and read it to him, where basically we had a detective, it was the 12th of September, telling him, you're under the radar. We're here to clear you. I mean, when you look at the radar, when you look at this net that was cast, it has so many holes in it. The state would have you believe that both homes were under 24-hour surveillance. It's just not true. The evidence of Detective Lippisch and the other detectives showed that. The state expects you to accept representations made by Detective Lippisch regarding the true time of the videos from this residence, and I want to start there. This concerns the state's timeline, which I would tell you flies in the face of common sense, but it's important to take into account how this evidence was gathered. You recall the list of times or the videos that were shown? He supposedly didn't, it was on a neighbor's cell phone. We saw no logs. We saw no indication of the veracity or the accuracy of those times. The state's basing this idea that she's pulling up in front of the Talavera residence and is somehow moving her car at 11:04 to avoid detection. You have to take this detective at his word. And again, I'm not necessarily saying he's lying, but he did a sloppy job of collecting that evidence. And this is the video evidence that I'm referring to. Remember, there was no embedded data here. We don't have time. He would have you believe that the vehicle is moved at 11:04. We don't know what time this is occurring. We do know that the vehicle perhaps was moved from the Burla, but we don't know the sequence of events. As you recall, and you will have the evidence, there was various blue lines showing triangles, and we heard that through the positioning of the GPS, you have movement, even if a vehicle is in one place. We don't have specific times, and we really don't know the order of how things occurred. We would urge you to believe and to consider that common sense would dictate that this was when Devyn left the residence at 2:04. There's going to be a close-up here. You'll have a computer screen. Zoom in on it. There you see the interior of the vehicle. You see Devyn getting in. You see a bag on the passenger seat. And she leaves. Please pay close attention. And again, not that I'm trying to tell you to do, but we've had this case for much longer time than you have. Look at the video evidence from 6505 Taylor Creek. Detective Lippish testified several times that he could only speak to items that he canvassed for, but he was happy to testify concerning other detectives who went unnamed that collected this evidence. It's clear from the testimony of a forensic examiner, O'Brien, whose credentials and whose testimony went unchallenged that we presented to you today. He testified that one of the three videos was compiled from a series of screenshots, which the Ring camera is set to capture by default in the absence of video activity. Where are the other screenshots? They only gave us 3. I'm not going to stand here and point the finger and say that this was done in bad faith. It was done out of sloppiness. Why weren't subpoenas issued? Why don't we get the complete record? This woman is on trial for murder. We heard nothing concerning them going to the third-party providers, Ring, Google, other parties. No, they're relying upon the cooperation of neighbors who are living their own lives and who very well may be indifferent to the gravity of this situation. Didn't give us the full picture, and that was the video that had constant, you got a good scene into or a good view of the residence. It's incomplete. We just have these 3. And again, this is at the new residence where it's been referred to. Porcupine here, we've got the truck. There's been an argument made that Deviere had to have been in the home the whole time. Based on what? Because the entrance to the neighborhood with the continuous camera doesn't show a vehicle? There's other ways to leave that residence. There's a walkway next to one house away. There's over the fence. this is something that's been discarded by the state, but again, I would submit to you that it goes to what Devyn is thinking. It goes to her innocence. She starts trying to contact Johnathan on the morning of the 7th, starting about 4 a.m. She'd left him. She'd left him at the residence. The plan was that they were going to take the girls to school that morning, and we have evidence, and you've heard uncontradicted evidence that that's what she did. The message she leaves him is concerning the girls' school supplies. She's letting him know that their daughter was sick, because we know that she's at that pharmacy, and it's a 24-hour pharmacy at 2:28 a.m. That's what went on. She hadn't killed him and decapitated him. She was worried about getting her daughters to school that morning. She sends messages of concern when he doesn't respond. The state claims, and again, this is where common sense comes into question, the state claims that Devyn was answering Jonathan's phone from the house the morning of 8/7/2023. You heard the argument concerning the notifications. We did hear from Detective Skinner that they didn't put it on airplane mode. Those notifications wouldn't have shown up. That evidence, like so many other pieces of evidence, were mishandled. But the state's going to have you believe that she purposely took the phone from Paladera to Porcupine Rim and leave it out on the driveway, and at the same time be calling it and answering it and leaving it on the driveway. That flies in the face of common sense. She took it and left it there, and then is answering it and calling it to provide some sort of an alibi. She's lucky that in this very slipshod investigation that she has as much evidence that she does to present to you that she didn't commit this crime. Crime scene, the footprints. There are footprints in the backyard. And we have, and I'll show you the photos, we marked them and had them admitted. We have this, the Henderson Police Department documenting these footprints, but then trying to basically throw shade on that, saying, well, they could have been there for some time. They weren't important. When you look at the photo, you can see that they're fresh. They wanted to argue that they're male or female. They didn't do any follow-up. There was no footprint comparisons to anybody's shoes in this case, much less Deviere's. You recall Yoko's testimony, there were 4 dogs in the backyard. If that footprint had been there for very long, common sense would dictate that the dogs would have walked through it. They would have been sullied. They weren't. They were fresh. Again, they were not analyzed or tested. And there it is. And Detective Ozawa just kind of discounted that and said, well, we don't know how long they were there, but apparently no one really looked at Yoko's testimony and Yoko's statements. 4 dogs were out there for most of the night. This was a big point of contention. And again, these aren't red herrings. These go right to the very heart of the case. There was no blood cast off in the bedroom. In spite of evidence, uncontroverted evidence, that a mechanical powered saw was being used to decapitate Johnathan. You recall, Coroner Yagi went so far as to try and compare a beheading by a mechanical tool there at a crime scene, and Dr. Sims took issue with this. She tried to compare that. These crime scene analysts tried to compare that to the dismemberment of a body under controlled conditions by specialized tools in the morgue. Bodies that have been refrigerated. But nonetheless, she testified that they still wear protective goggles and aprons to protect themselves from this cast-off. Luminol, we heard no testimony whatsoever that luminol was used by the crime scene analysts. That would show indications of blood or attempts to wipe it up. Nothing. What's clear, and it was kind of laborious at the beginning of this trial, was Yoko's testimony, because her testimony was so crucial to the timing of this case. There were some difficulties with the interpreter. However, I'd submit to you she speaks pretty good English. It was important to memorialize what she told officers the morning of in the 40-minute conversation, as well as what she testified to the grand jury. She testified that she saw Devyn at 1 a.m. and Devyn didn't have any blood on her. If you follow the state's timeline, it's sometime around then, and it's unclear. She's involved in this murder and decapitation. She stated that no gloves were worn by Devyn when she met her at 1 a.m. And you recall the testimony concerning the dishes and the alcohol bottles. And there were some issues concerning Johnathan's level of drinking. 15 minutes. She testified that the light was on. That brings to question the veracity and the reliability of the statements through her multiple interviews that Devyn made to the detectives. There was no blood visible on Devyn's shirt at the CVS drive-thru pharmacy. And thank God that she stopped there. Because again, we have real time. We have real evidence that shows that she didn't commit this crime and not some detective's opinion. There's another issue concerning this, the mixture of ammonia, bleach, the stench. Remember that? We heard that the first responders, that they said that the smell got worse the longer they were there. If we're to believe the state's timeline, this is smoking for 9 hours. That flies in the face of common sense. Ammonia evaporates quickly. And again, your common experiences. The state never, and one of you posed a question to Dr. Sims. Again, it's the state and the state alone that bears this burden. Where was the expert to talk about that? That was important. This case was out of the ordinary. It's clearly gruesome. But because it's gruesome doesn't make that woman guilty. It isn't evidence that she committed this crime. Here we are, 2:27 in the 24-hour pharmacy. And you'll have this. Look at her. She's sipping her water. Apparently this is after she's murdered a man and decapitated him. She's reaching out of the vehicle. No marks, no blood, nothing. And Sims testified that this would have been messy. So she's just decapitated. She's murdered and decapitated Johnathan. And she's making sure that she picks up her daughter's medications on her way home. There was a very good question that was asked concerning, was there any stops? There wasn't. Her vehicle didn't go to any isolated areas, to any trash bins. There's been times when I've gone through moves and I've gone behind the bonds and dumped trash out in their dumpsters. There's no evidence of that because it didn't happen. The state will have you believe that there's this bucket of blood that's the reciprocal of all this blood that's squirting out when she's sawing his head off. What did she do with that? If she did. The car didn't go anywhere. She went home. There's no rags. There's nothing in that vehicle. We do know that they recovered, and this is based in part of the video that we saw from the terrible herbs. Again, I don't want to point fingers, but her life is on the line. They didn't do their job. There was no direction of what to get and when to get it. We heard from Detective Lippisch that he got that video evidencing her clothes around the 11th of August. That warrant was served on the 7th, and we didn't hear much about what they picked up on the 15th. They made a big deal about the shoes, the swoosh, but we showed you evidence in the photographs, and it's in evidence of the black shoes with the white soles. I mean, she gets arrested on the 15th. Game over. It's done. According to Yoko, and this is important, and I read the statement to her because it was so dispositive. She said Johnathan's room was a mess. And there's this kind of a feigning of not understanding, and I said, man, these are your own words. And I read her own words to her. During her initial interview, she stated that there were 2 chairs flipped upside down. That's evidence of a struggle. But then we don't see that on the body cam. What happened? We don't have that in any diagrams of the crime scene. But when she spoke to police and thank goodness it was recorded, she talked about 2 chairs being flipped upside down. And obviously her memory would have been far better at that time than it would be now. But again, you know, there were some questions by the state. You were traumatized, things were terrible. I'm sure it was. But the veracity of the statements and the accuracy of the statements shine through. She was trying to help law enforcement and give them clues concerning who committed this murder. There's no reference made in Devyn's statements about chairs, about a struggle. Johnathan was killed after she left. What's kind of weird is that there were 2 belts tied together on the ground near the bed. There's been no explanation by the state, and we can't give you one, but something's going on in here. Crime scene GPS. Devyn's car is trackable. We know that she didn't stop. You know, she was there that night, and that's why she was charged. Her phone is trackable clearly. No deviation is made to some remote location. She went to the pharmacy and went home. There's no anomalous stops, and this was brought up by you. She gets the medication and gets home because her girls have school early the next morning. The timing, and this is obviously where timing is very, very important. We do know when they leave the terrible herbs. You see 22:11. We know that when they got home, they spoke to Yoko. We don't know how long they spoke, but do you recall Yoko's testimony? Her words were, it was a very good day. She'd known for months that they were getting together. They were trying to unite the family. You know what? No union is perfect. Hey, we all know that. There are ups and downs, but she and Johnathan had a union. You know, the state in their first closing, they're going to get a second one, try and paint her as this devious, manipulative, conniving temptress. But think about that. The flip side, a 19-year-old. You know, when we talk about motive, what drives a person to murder, is it not passion of a young man? His first love? His first love that's coming to an end when dad's coming in and moving him, the dad that he said was never there for him. You know, it's kind of an archetype. You know, the father that's killed by his son. I mean, it's in, I believe it's Isaiah 38:18. We've got these Greek stories of it, Oedipus. I mean, there's various variations of that, but it's an archetype. Saturn. It's known, and it's as old as the human condition. Fathers are sometimes killed by their sons, and that's why we wanted to underscore, and we spent a great deal of time in our opening statement, because we didn't know where it was going to go with Deviere, but we knew that they'd had a relationship that had been kept clandestine. Deviere covered for Deviere, and Devyn covered for Deviere. This is important. I would submit to you that this is a more accurate and a more reasonable timeline. Yoko was awake. 10:58, there's a 44-second call to Deviere from her phone. You recall, we get the text, and you want to talk about an alibi-type text, putting the girls to sleep. It's 10:36, I'm going to bed. That has been refuted by facts. He testified here that, well, maybe he woke up at 2. That was the first time. Previously, he had testified before a grand jury that he got home, put the girls to bed, went to sleep, woke up, Devyn was there. That is a lie. Why would he lie? What motivation would he have to lie? He's a fairly smart young man. I mean, he was kind of catatonic here, and understandably so in the witness chair. But again, we need to look at motivations, because motivations, they author actions. At any rate, and we knew the night before that Devyn had been there late with Johnathan. But after we were to believe that he's asleep at 10:36, we've got a 44-second call from Devyn's phone to Deviere. 8 minutes pass. 11:05, we get that 10-second burla in the Nissan Armada. It may have been moved. You're to determine that, because I'll tell you, we really don't know. The evidence is not reliable. Whether it pulled up and stopped, or what we saw there was Devyn leaving, we don't know. States to provide that to you, the timeline. They haven't done that due to this slipping through the cracks in this slipshod investigative work. Now, an hour and 55 minutes pass. Yoko is awake. There's no suspicious noises or activities. And we have a 15-minute timeline. Because you recall, Yoko's into time. She corrected me. She looks at the clock. They talked for 15 minutes. And it was kind of like pulling teeth. She admitted about the dishes and the alcohol. They talked for 15 minutes. We're to believe that, and again, this goes to Devyn's statement and reliability after she's subjected to interview after interview. Yoko says the lights are on. The state would have you believe, apparently, that Johnathan's dead. She struck him in the head, and he's dead. Meanwhile, she has this 15-minute communication. Again, no blood, gloves, chemical smell, any of that on Devyn. At 1:15, Yoko goes back upstairs. And you recall yesterday, that was kind of rebutted Lena's testimony. They kept hitting her with that hour and 4 minutes. That's why you don't talk to the police. That's why you have a right to remain silent. One thing that we have learned is don't talk to the cops, especially if you're the target, because they're going to take what you say and they're going to twist it. Yoko was equivocal in her testimony when she testified before us. This time, and she's just testified once before a grand jury, she's equivocal. She was awake the whole time. She looked at YouTube. She went to sleep. It's equivocal. But at 2 a.m., for the first time here, she says she hears the bang. And I think we had the prosecutor bang his hand. She'd never talked about that before. But still, may have happened. 2:04, Devyn's leaving. Maybe it was the door closing. We don't know. That's her testimony. But you have to evaluate her testimony. But again, this is really kind of shedding light on this timeline. She previously testified that she heard dogs at 3 a.m. She brought it up 3 times during her police interview. Apparently she felt it was noteworthy, and she testified to that September 14th before the grand jury. Yeah, the dogs are barking. It's 3 a.m. Someone's put the dogs outside. The facts, taken as a whole, and not this little piece here and this little piece there, show that this murder, and it's silly to say a murder didn't occur. Obviously it did. It happened after Devyn left. The facts, taken as a whole, bear that out. Again, you've heard, and it's uncontroverted, Devyn leaves at 2:04. You know, what's of note is that presumably Yoko went to sleep after she went upstairs. Part of her testimony previously is that she was awake during this whole time. Where's the testimony of a mechanically powered saw? It happened. It's more reasonable to believe that that happened after 3 a.m. We don't know when it happened. She didn't do it. The dogs were outside barking. Somebody's in that house. Somebody has killed Johnathan and somebody is cutting his head off. Again, what kind of passion does that take? Not an on-again, off-again relationship that Devyn had with him. It's a person that's enraged, you know. Well, watch the TV, the police stories. They talk about stabbings are personal versus a shooting. What's it going to take to cut a head off? And what kind of anger and what kind of resentment is that going to cause for someone to do that? You know, there's been a great deal of argument made and points attempted to be scored that Devyn did that because she'd do anything to get her kids. It was uncontroverted that regardless of what was going on with the family workers, she had those girls from May 27th on. She had them all summer. And when we talk about motivations, we know that Johnathan was moving in. There was talk of marriage. And, you know, they want you to believe that the rings weren't there. Look at this investigation. Look at the photographs of the trash cans. I believe one was Exhibit 68. We have no evidence and nothing to show that they emptied that. And, you know, why would they take a picture or preserve a ring? They didn't preserve anything else in those trash cans. It's easy for them to come in years later and say, I didn't see a ring. There was no notations. And they'd go through hundreds of crime scenes. When they were there, you know, when Miss Wilson was there, they were looking for weapons. They were looking for evidence of a murder. They weren't looking for rings. And they're asking you to convict her on this shoddy police work and have you believe that Devyn's lying about these rings when there is no indication that they were looking for rings. This is the state's only evidence that she committed this murder and this decapitation. Because you got to put them together. Common sense would dictate whoever did one did the other. The interviews of Devyn Michaels. I'm going to focus on the third interview.
And then, have you guys ever had a sexual relationship?
Yeah, we had.
Okay. But it's not there now?
No, I can't even have sex now.
This is important. This isn't something that Devyn is making up. You have her medical records. The time, 12/5/22, vaginal hysterectomy. She's had surgery. She's not having sex. She's telling the detectives the truth.
Okay, we've got that. Is there any reason why John's blood or anything DNA related would be in your vehicle? Because that goes back to our station, our CSA, they're going to thoroughly look for everything in that vehicle.
I couldn't tell you. If he was bleeding from when he was doing the thing, he helped load up the truck. So if he was bleeding, it might be
or your Armada.
my Armada.
Okay.
Like, he was putting the things in the car, like anything else
Sure,
that he had.
there's going to be obvious areas where blood doesn't belong even if you're loading. So I'm just asking you directly, because if we do find any DNA evidence in that vehicle, obviously we want to make sure we asked you if there would be a reason.
No, the only thing I knew he said was his hand that he hit on the table. That's the only time he ever said he was bleeding, and he said it got a pretty good gash.
Okay, but you didn't see that?
No, I did not, so I can't really speak on it. But he was still loading everything up, so I don't think it was really bothering him that much.
This is the inside of the Armada. With the testimony from Ozawa, it appeared the vehicle had just been washed. That's been disproven. The burla shows that that didn't happen. The location coordinates show that that didn't happen. Look at the inside of this vehicle. I know my partner, Mr. Horvath, had asked Detective Spangler, well, was it very clean inside? I think he made a reference to teenage kids, something along those lines. This isn't well kept. I've seen much worse, but it's not well kept. The important point is we're to believe that there's buckets of blood in here. There's bloody rags. There's a head, a murder weapon, a saw. There's nothing in there. They sealed this vehicle and they took it off. If you're to believe that she murdered and decapitated Johnathan, you're to believe, common sense would dictate that there's going to be some indicia of a crime in here. You're taking buckets of blood because they weren't at that residence. This made reference, and again, nobody understood the significance at the time. Miss Miriam didn't, but there's the table that she talked about. It was a moving day. Injuries do happen. We're to believe, again, Dr. Yagi's, the reliability of her testimony. She said there was no bleeding injuries. Well, we've got an injury right there. Whether it's bleeding or not, we don't know. But that's a sign of an injury. And remember, this is the same doctor, the same coroner that said John didn't have tattoos on his arms. A big point was made about the telephone. And we're to believe that Devyn is so sophisticated and so cool and so cunning and so informed that she can murder this guy, decapitate him, not leave any evidence, and then drop his phone in her driveway. A more reasonable explanation, it's tired. She's got girls that are going to school in the morning. She's been carrying things, it's late. She obviously brought the phone. Whether it was knowing or not, we don't know. It appeared that it had fallen on the side. She tries to give an explanation. You recall about the cigarette butts? She didn't know the phone was there. That's why she was calling the phone, following up with Johnathan. She knew he wasn't dead because she didn't kill him. Another thing that was a big point of contention, sometimes little things can have very large implications. Remember the issue about the blood on the screen? Papakostas, the DNA expert, testified that she couldn't confirm that it was blood. There was a presumptive test, but the confirmatory test, and some of you are far more knowledgeable than I am, it was not. She couldn't confirm that it was blood. So then the state recalls crime scene analyst Miriam to apparently discredit their DNA expert in reference to the blood. And this is the entity that's charged with proving this case beyond a reasonable doubt. They're calling a crime scene analyst on a presumptive test to discredit the DNA expert who gave testimony, uncontroverted testimony, concerning the lack of a confirmation for this blood. We know that John's DNA is on the phone. I would submit that it is somewhat significant in determining whether the state's proven this case. Devyn's isn't. It was handled. Maybe there weren't epithelial cells left from Devyn. Clearly, Devyn took the phone, knowing or not, and I would submit to you that given the circumstances and the chaos of a move, she didn't know she had the phone. It's not evidence that she killed him. Just like the key, it's not evidence that she killed him, or the wallet. She's going to go through all this work to leave this, this crime scene spotless or clean and not leave anything behind, no blood, nothing in her car. Yet she's going to drop the phone and then make calls to it. This is what the state is relying upon, this interview. And you recall the tenor of this interview? Please don't just look at one part or another. Listen to the whole thing. The power dynamic. You've got two large men. You've got a woman who they had said, "We Mirandized you earlier today." You have to ask yourself what went on. What happened before this interview?
John?
This is Johnathan when you last saw him?
Yeah, but he had his boxers on.
Okay, he had his boxers on.
I don't know, he had his boxers on. His boxers were black boxer briefs. He had boxer briefs on.
That's what I'm talking about. The shit's getting real. Keep looking at that. Take another look at this.
This was into the interview, and it was a fairly lengthy interview. She'd had multiple interviews before. We heard in this interview that they had told her previously that day about the decapitation. So there's more going on. She knew. You know, it's at 16:01, and it's interesting that the state showed you the exhibit, the one that she supposedly wrote. When you look at the original exhibit, it says handwritten by Devyn Michaels. It wasn't. She drew a line, and that's significant. It was Detective Christopher that wrote that. And again, this is in the crises, in the crucible of a very confrontational interview. She didn't author that. And I'm assuming that Mr. Giordani is going to stand up when I sit down because he gets the last word. And he's going to say that somehow, how could she have known that? She hadn't been shown the photos. This gentleman had seen the photos and he filled in those details. And she's sitting there having been arrested previous to this interview and facing the horror of being accused of a crime, a murder that she didn't commit. Here's the boxers. Why lie? Why lie? When she left, he was wearing those boxer shorts. She was consistent in that. Why choose that hill to die on? She was telling the truth.
Have you had moments in the past where you
Yes.
have been stuff where
Yes,
this happened?
yes, there's things in my past where I cannot remember. And yes, I have talked to my doctor about it. Yes, they're trying to figure out what's going on with me. Yes.
Okay, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but what is wrong with you that you say that
I
you're trying to
don't
be
know.
happy?
They're testing me now. I think yesterday, for whatever reason, my brain tingles and then I black out. And I literally have it on documentation from the doctor, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with me.
This interview is on August 15th of 2023. This condition that she's talking about, it's documented 6/7/2023. New patient established her patient she feels like tingling, vibrating in back of head, comes and goes, denies headache, has dizziness. This isn't some ploy. I mean, she's in this high pressure, confrontational interview, and she's trying to give as truthful information as possible. She's had some problems. This isn't some defense where, oh, she blacked out and didn't know what she did. She didn't commit this crime. She didn't commit this decapitation. She's had some issues that she's been trying to address. And again, she's being truthful to these detectives. It's confirmed.
I think you're real. Absolutely. You're real that and everything you can't even have the audacity to give in closure. Shame on you. That's terrible. Also, there's some anger now, huh? Is that how you feel against him?
She's pushing back. She's been interviewed over and over again. She's telling him, I've told you I haven't done this. What we're dealing with now is a woman that's denying that she committed this murder. You know, it'll be up for you to determine whether she hit him in the head when he was grabbing her leg. She was consistent that he was alive. He was breathing. There's no evidence that she hit him in the head. And again, given this, we know that when people are confronted they'll try and give something to appease the other party, this power dynamic. She was trying to give. In this interview, you'll read, they threaten. What you do here is going to determine what happens with you and your daughters. She gives a little, but then snaps back and says, I didn't do this. And she's expecting, through all these interviews, for them to pick this up and do their job. But they'd already made their minds up. You heard from Lanai yesterday. In their minds, she was guilty. That's it. And we're dealing with this investigation that you heard from Sean O'Brien, 3%. We're dealing with 3% of the information that was available on those devices. But still, in that 3%, we've been piecing together what really happened. We do know, and it's clear, incomplete Celebrite reader files. Critical database files are missing from the phones. Now, years later, we're trying to piece together a defense to defend a woman that didn't commit this murder. There's artifacts which would indicate a need for further investigation. And Sean O'Brien testified that generally, as he's been a forensic analyst, he's been involved in law enforcement. There's supposed to be this back and forth. Hey, get us this. As this investigation develops, we need more information. There was no indication that that occurred in this case. She's at the house. She's the low-hanging fruit. She's guilty. The end. All investigation stops. Image of Devyn and Deviere. And again, we would like to have more, but we can show you this image. Now, of all the images that are available on a cell phone, I think I probably have 4,000. It's going to be the state's position, well, this is just randomly popping up. Devyn had said that he was asleep, or Deviere had said that he was asleep at this time. He testified under oath. He lied under oath. Look. There's a Discord chat application, 231. This is telling. The state can play 3 phone calls from the girls who are adorable. Those were all after 11 o'clock. We have no proof where Deviere is. But we have 2 indications of 2 artifacts at 2:12 a.m. and 2:31 a.m. that he's up and he is engaged. There's a deliberately deleted file. This is the image. 2:12:38 a.m. This is after there's been 3 calls from the home phone that night to Devyn. 3 of them were the girls. What about the other 8? But of all images, at 2:12:38 a.m., this is being looked at on Deviere's phone. Game box. Again, and this is important, this was not preserved, this was overlooked. There's photos. He was a gamer. They had issues. Gamers are on their game platforms and they talk to other people. We have a Discord file. There's a remnant of that. He's using that at 2:31 a.m. in the morning. He's up. He didn't drive his car over there. And again, I can't tell you for certain if he committed this murder. But he could have easily gotten out of the house, and he's not going to walk. He's going to talk to a fellow gamer. We now know that he's up, and he's lied. He's lied under oath. What does he have to lose? I mean, he was able to avoid the motives through the course of this investigation concerning getting kicked out of his house and losing his wife, who he, based upon all the photos, and we didn't have to go through those, you saw them, he was in love with her. But we do, in this 3% that's available to us, we can show you that he was up. Not 1 indication, but 2. And given the nature of that photograph, the multiple phone calls that were made earlier, and now we have this Discord, we have a remnant that he's on and at. It's not too hard to imagine that he went there. Those are the facts. And the timelines, you recall the detectives that for the Henderson Police Department that testified, they set out timelines, but they didn't do a more in-depth analysis. And this is what our analysis, with only 3%, we were able to show he was awake. This was deleted, it's there. I'm not saying that was that night, but that's something that should be taken into account, headed there now. He's there in this area, and you'll have the exhibit. He's next to a remote area. Don't know if he had a job there or not. This is the morning after 8/7/10/25. You know, when detectives interviewed him, he'd said, hey, I've been drinking. We don't know if he'd been drinking all night. We don't. He's a drinker. He's in a remote area where, and obviously there's been no testimony, there's been no investigation in those wash areas. We know he was over there. We know he was up. We know that he was looking at a picture of him and Devyn. You know, you see on the crime TV shows about motive, means, and opportunity. He had all three. He had the motive. He had the means. He didn't walk there, but he was talking to somebody. Clearly, he had the opportunity given the timeline. But again, I'm not going to stand before you and say he did it. We don't know. She didn't. These were texts that were between him and his father. You have nothing to tell me, WTH or TF. I thought you were my seed. If what I can know, I can't fuck with you. Boy, that's true. Devil shit. It was clear, and he tried to smooth things over through the course of his testimony, but Deviere did not like his dad. He had an affair with his dad's girlfriend. You know, these things don't reflect too good on her, okay? They reflect poorly on Devyn. But Devyn's not here for good moral character. You can despise the choices that she made, but you can't convict her for murder, for a murder that she didn't commit. This is their home. The home that he's being kicked out of. Again, there's the walkway down the side. There's a way to get out the back. There's no cameras that were pulled on Rebecca. We don't know. The police did a slipshod investigation. We can't show you him walking away. They didn't collect the evidence, but the motive would point to Deviere. This gun, there was an issue made concerning that. That gun was looked at the afternoon of, I'm sorry, that's another gun. There's guns in his possession. We don't know if that person was shot or not. Johnathan was. The swords, again, we're not trying to throw these things out, but this just shows a conscious indifference on the part of law enforcement in collecting evidence that could exculpate her. Their minds were made up. She was guilty. There's so much evidence here that you can go through and look. Again, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your attentiveness. You know, this is the last chance that we'll have to speak. There's going to be things that I have overlooked, things that I missed. Don't hold them against her. Hold it against me. You remember the movie 12 Angry Men? The jury went through and exonerated that young man. I'm going to ask you to do that, to look at the facts. You may not be comfortable with a verdict of not guilty. She's done some bad things. She didn't commit this murder. She didn't kill him and cut his head off, because those two things are combined. Common sense would dictate that they are. She's not guilty of this charge. Thank you.